The Wyoming wind carved deep furrows across the endless prairie, carrying dust that settled like sorrow on everything it touched. Emily Carter pulled her threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders as she walked the rutted dirt road, her 2 children trailing behind like weary shadows. 7-year-old Matthew clutched a wooden horse his father had carved, while 4-year-old Sarah dragged a corn-husk doll through the dust, both too tired to complain about their empty stomachs. The wagon that had carried them this far had broken, an axle 5 miles back, leaving them with only what they could carry and the dying hope that the next town might offer them refuge. Emily's calloused hands trembled as she counted the few coins in her pocket. Knowing they wouldn't last another day, Thunder Ridge Ranch sprawled across the horizon like a promise. Its weathered buildings, standing defiant against the harsh landscape that had claimed so many dreams. Daniel Cross stood on his porch, watching the 3 figures approach through the shimmering heat, his weathered face betraying nothing of the loneliness that echoed through the empty rooms behind him. At 42, he had learned to read desperation in a person's gait, and the woman walking toward his gate carried it like a heavy burden. His late wife Margaret's voice seemed to whisper on the wind, reminding him of the kindness she had always shown to strangers, and he felt his heart stir with an emotion he thought had died with her 3 winters ago. The ranch hands had already noticed the approaching family, their conversations dying as they watched their boss step down from the porch. Emily forced her spine straight as she reached the ranch gate, drawing upon reserves of dignity she didn't know she still possessed. Her children pressed close to her sides, instinctively sensing the importance of this moment, their wide eyes taking in the sprawling ranch with a mixture of wonder and fear. She had practiced the words during their long walk, rehearsing how she would present herself as capable and worthy despite her obvious circumstances. The coins in her pocket felt lighter than air, and she knew this might be their last chance before they faced the unthinkable choice between pride and survival. Daniel's piercing blue eyes met hers across the dusty yard, and she saw something there that gave her the courage to speak. Before we continue, leave your like, share our story, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you. I can clean house, sir, Emily said, her voice carrying clearly across the stillness, each word weighted with quiet desperation and fierce determination. The simple statement hung in the air between them like a bridge neither had expected to find, connecting to wounded souls across the vast emptiness of their separate griefs. Daniel saw past her torn dress and dusty shoes to the steel in her spine, recognizing in her the same stubborn strength that had carried him through his darkest hours after Margaret's death. Something shifted in the careful walls he had built around his heart, and he found himself stepping forward before his mind could construct all the reasons why helping a stranger was impractical. The ranch hands stopped their work entirely, sensing that whatever happened next would change the rhythm of life at Thunder Ridge Ranch forever. "Come in, I'll shelter you," Daniel replied without hesitation, his voice rougher than he intended, betraying the emotions he struggled to keep buried. Emily's knees nearly buckled with relief, and she had to bite her lip to keep from crying in front of this stern-faced man who had just thrown her a lifeline. When she had almost given up hope, Sarah tugged at her mother's skirt, whispering about whether the nice man had food, while Matthew stood straighter, already sensing that this moment marked the end of their wandering. Daniel's unexpected kindness struck Emily like a physical blow, reminding her that goodness still existed in a world that had seemed determined to crush her spirit. As she looked into his weathered face, she saw past his gruff exterior to the loneliness that mirrored her own, and understood that perhaps they were exactly what each other needed. The ranch house loomed before them like a sanctuary, its wide porch and solid walls promising the security Emily had dreamed of during countless cold nights on the road. Daniel led them inside, his boots echoing on the wooden floors of rooms that had stood empty of feminine presence for too long, dust motes dancing in the afternoon light that streamed through unwashed windows. Emily's experienced eye took in the neglected details, the unswept hearth, the dishes stacked carelessly on the kitchen table, the general air of a place that had forgotten what it meant to be a home. Her children pressed close to her sides, overwhelmed by the sudden transition from the harsh outdoors to this spacious interior, their small hands reaching out tentatively to touch the rough-hewn furniture. Daniel watched their wonder with something approaching tenderness, remembering how Margaret had once brought this same sense of life to these rooms. "You can have the room at the top of the stairs," Daniel said, his words coming out more brusque than he intended as he struggled with the unfamiliar warmth spreading through his chest. Emily nodded gratefully, gathering her children close as she followed him up the narrow staircase, her hand trailing along the smooth banister that spoke of better times. The room he showed them was simple but clean, with a large bed that would easily accommodate all three of them, and a window that looked out over the rolling hills toward the horizon they had walked across. Sarah immediately climbed onto the bed, bouncing once before exhaustion claimed her, while Matthew positioned himself by the window like a sentinel, still clutching his wooden horse. Daniel lingered in the doorway, watching Emily smooth her daughter's hair with infinite tenderness, and felt something crack open inside his chest that he had thought permanently sealed. That evening, Emily made her first critical choice as she rolled up her sleeves and began cleaning the kitchen, determined to prove her worth to the man who had shown her such unexpected kindness. The decision to stay and fight for a place here rather than continuing their aimless wandering felt like stepping off a cliff into an uncertain future. But she had learned that sometimes the greatest risks offered the only real hope of salvation. Daniel found her scrubbing the wooden table with fierce concentration, her movements economical and sure despite her obvious fatigue. And he understood that this wasn't just about earning her keep, it was about reclaiming her dignity. Her children sat quietly in the corner, watching their mother work with the solemnity of those who understood that their fate hung in the balance. The simple act of choosing to stay transformed the atmosphere of the ranch house, as if the walls themselves were awakening from a long sleep. As night settled over Thunder Ridge Ranch, Emily tucked her children into the large bed, their small boftas finally relaxed for the first time in weeks. She sat by the window, looking out at the star-filled sky that seemed so much brighter here than it had during their journey, and allowed herself to feel the first stirring of something that might have been hope. Daniel's footsteps on the stairs reminded her that she was no longer alone in the world, that there was someone else under this roof who understood the weight of carrying on when everything familiar had been stripped away. The sound of his door closing down the hall was oddly comforting, a reminder that they were safe, at least for tonight. Her children's peaceful breathing filled the room like a benediction, and Emily whispered a prayer of gratitude to whatever force had guided their steps to this sanctuary. Dawn broke over the ranch with the promise of new beginnings, painting the eastern sky in shades of gold that reflected the cautious optimism stirring in Emily's heart. She rose before the sun fully cleared the horizon, her body accustomed to early rising from months of uncertainty, and made her way quietly downstairs to begin the day's work. The kitchen felt different in the morning, lightless, abandoned, more like a space waiting to be reclaimed by those who understood the sacred nature of creating a home. Daniel was already up, standing on the back porch with a cup of coffee, his silhouette outlined against the growing light as he surveyed his domain. When he turned and saw her in the kitchen, something passed between them that was more than employer and housekeeper, more than two strangers thrown together by circumstance. The ranch hands gathered for breakfast with barely concealed curiosity, their weathered faces showing surprise as Emily served them hot biscuits and eggs, cooked to perfection. These were men who had learned to expect little from life beyond hard work and loneliness, and the sight of a woman tending to their comfort with such quiet competence stirred memories of mothers and wives they had left behind or lost along the way. Daniel watched Emily move among them with natural grace, refilling coffee cups and ensuring everyone had enough to eat, and saw how her presence immediately softened the rough edges of his hired men. Matthew and Sarah sat at the end of the table, their eyes wide with wonder at being surrounded by so many adults who spoke gently to them and made sure they had everything they needed. By the end of their first week at Thunder Ridge Ranch, Emily and her children had crossed an invisible threshold from temporary guests to permanent residents. Though none of them spoke the words aloud, the transformation of the ranch house was remarkable. Windows sparkled in the morning sun, floors gleamed with careful attention, and the air itself seemed lighter, filled with the sounds of domestic life that had been absent for too long. Emily had established routines that gave structure to their days while allowing space for the children to explore their new environment under Daniel's watchful but kind supervision. This was their new world, harsh and beautiful in equal measure, where survival depended not just on individual strength but on the bonds they were forming with each other and the land that surrounded them. The weeks that followed brought a gradual thawing of the emotional winter that had settled over Thunder Ridge Ranch, as Emily and Daniel learned to navigate the delicate dance of two wounded souls sharing the same space. She discovered that beneath his gruff exterior, Daniel possessed a gentle patience with her children that spoke of hidden depths of kindness. while he found himself looking forward to the sound of her voice as she went about her daily tasks. Matthew began following the ranch hands around like a shadow, absorbing their wisdom about horses and cattle with the hunger of a boy starved for male guidance, while Sarah appointed herself Daniel's unofficial helper, chattering to him about everything and nothing as he went about his work. The house itself seemed to exhale with contentment, its rooms filling with the warmth that comes only when a dwelling is truly lived in rather than merely occupied. Emily's past remained largely unspoken, a territory marked by pain that she wasn't ready to share. But Daniel read the story, in the careful way she handled money and the protective fierceness with which she watched her children. He understood the weight of loss that she carried, recognizing in her the same careful guardedness he had cultivated after Margaret's death. The way survivors learned to protect their hearts from further damage, their conversations remained practical during daylight hours, discussions of meals and supplies, the children's needs, the running of the household. But in the evening quiet, sitting on the porch after the children were asleep, they began to share the smaller pieces of themselves. The distance between their rocking chairs seemed to shrink imperceptibly each night, though neither acknowledged the growing intimacy of their shared silences. The first real test of their new arrangement came when Sarah fell ill with a fever that left her listless and clinging to her mother with desperate fingers. Emily's terror was palpable as she hovered over her daughter, memories of how quickly death could claim those she loved, making every slight rise in temperature feel like a potential catastrophe. Daniel surprised her by sending for the doctor, without being asked, covering the expense, without comment, and then sitting up through the long night helping her keep watch over the restless child. His presence during those dark hours was an anchor of strength that Emily hadn't realized she needed, his steady calm helping her maintain the composure that her children required. When Sarah's fever finally broke just before dawn, Emily looked across the rumpled bed to find Daniel's eyes reflecting the same relief that flooded her own heart. Spring arrived at Thunder Ridge Ranch with a burst of wildflowers that transformed the harsh landscape into something approaching paradise, and with it came the first real laughter Emily had heard from her children since their father's death. Matthew discovered a talent for handling the younger horses, his small hands surprisingly sure as he learned to curry and feed them under the patient guidance of Tom, the oldest of the ranch hands. Sarah made friends with a barn cat who had recently had kittens, spending hours in the hayloft, whispering secrets to the tiny creatures and carefully reporting their progress to anyone who would listen. Emily watched their transformation with a mixture of joy and trepidation, understanding that their growing attachment to this place made them vulnerable to loss in ways they hadn't been when they owned nothing and expected nothing. Daniel began teaching Matthew the basics of ranching with the same methodical patience he had once reserved for his own work, recognizing in the boy a hunger for knowledge and purpose that reminded him of himself at that age. Their daily rides around the property became a ritual that neither would have missed, Daniel pointing out landmarks and explaining the complex relationships that governed life on the range, while Matthew absorbed every word with serious concentration. Emily watched them from the kitchen window, her heart swelling with gratitude at seeing her son blossom under the attention of a man who clearly understood what it meant to be a father. The sight of Daniel lifting Matthew onto his horse or explaining the finer points of reading weather signs stirred emotions in her that she thought had died with her husband. The emotional commitment that had been building between Emily and Daniel crystallized one evening when Sarah, feverish with another childhood illness, cried out in her sleep for her papa. Without thinking, Daniel rose from his chair by the fire and went to her, his large hands gentle as he smoothed her hair and whispered words of comfort until she settled back into peaceful sleep. Emily, watching from the doorway, felt her carefully constructed walls crumble as she realized that this man had somehow become essential to all of them, not just as employer, but as the heart of the family they were creating together. When Daniel returned to the living room, they sat in silence for a long time, both understanding that something fundamental had shifted between them, that they had moved beyond the simple arrangement of employer and housekeeper into something far more complex and precious. The arrival of spring roundup brought new challenges as Daniel prepared for the annual cattle drive that would take him and most of his men away from the ranch for several weeks. Emily found herself taking on responsibilities she had never imagined, learning to manage the daily operations of a working ranch while caring for her children and maintaining the household. The isolation that had once terrified her now felt manageable, buffered by the knowledge that she belonged here and had a stake in the ranch's success. Daniel's trust in her abilities was evident in the detailed instructions he left and the authority he gave her to make decisions in his absence, treating her as a partner rather than merely an employee. The night before he left, they sat on the porch longer than usual, neither wanting to acknowledge that this separation felt different from any they had experienced before. While Daniel was away, Emily discovered depths of strength she hadn't known she possessed as she dealt with a series of minor crises that tested her resolve and resourcefulness. A late spring storm damaged part of the barn roof, requiring her to organize repairs with the skeletal crew that had remained behind. One of the milk cows developed complications during calving that demanded quick thinking and steady nerves as she assisted the hired hand who served as the ranch's unofficial veterinarian. Each challenge she met successfully increased her confidence and deepened her connection to Thunder Ridge Ranch, making her feel less like a guest and more like a true partner in its operation. Her children, sensing their mother's growing assurance, seemed to settle more deeply into their new life, their laughter becoming a regular sound in the house again. The loneliness of Daniel's absence was tempered by the letters that arrived, his careful handwriting describing the progress of the cattle drive and asking detailed questions about the ranch's operations. Emily found herself looking forward to these missives with an intensity that surprised her, and her own responses grew longer and more personal as the weeks passed. She wrote about the children's daily adventures, the changing of the seasons, the small improvements she was making to the house, but between the lines lay deeper truths about her growing attachment to this place and the man who had made it possible. Matthew asked repeatedly when Daniel would return, while Sarah began leaving drawings for him under his coffee cup, clear evidence that they too felt the absence of the man who had become so central to their world. Daniel's return was marked by an air of celebration that surprised everyone with its intensity, as if the ranch itself had been holding its breath during his absence. Emily found her heart racing as she heard the sound of hoofbeats in the distance, and she had to force herself not to run to greet him like an eager child. The changes he found in his absence, the repaired barn, the thriving garden Emily had planted, the improvements to the house spoke of a woman who had truly made this place her home. His embrace with the children was warm and prolonged, but it was the look he exchanged with Emily over their heads that revealed how much their relationship had evolved during the separation. That evening, as they sat on the familiar porch, the easy intimacy between them felt like coming home. Summer brought its own rhythm to Thunder Ridge Ranch, with long days of hard work balanced by evenings of quiet contentment that had become precious to all of them. Emily's garden flourished under her careful attention, providing fresh vegetables for the table and flowers for the house that transformed their living space into something approaching elegance despite its rustic simplicity. Daniel began including her in more of the ranch's business decisions, valuing her practical wisdom and her intuitive understanding of what would work in their particular situation. The children had bronzed under the prairie sun, their faces bright with health and happiness, as they explored every corner of their expanding world under the watchful eyes of adults who had learned to love them as their own. The easy contentment of their summer was interrupted by rumors that reached them through traveling merchants and occasional visitor stories of families being torn apart by new laws, of women and children left defenseless. When men died without proper legal arrangements, Emily began to feel the fragile security of their situation more keenly, understanding that her unofficial position at Thunder Ridge Ranch left them all vulnerable to forces beyond their control. Daniel noticed her growing anxiety, the way she watched the horizon for potential threats, and began to understand that their unconventional arrangement might need to be formalized in ways that would protect them all. The question of marriage hung unspoken between them, weighted with practical necessity and the deeper emotions they had been carefully avoiding. The first serious threat to their peaceful existence arrived in the form of a letter from the county courthouse, informing Daniel that questions had been raised about his household arrangements and the propriety of an unmarried woman living on his ranch with her children. The implication was clear. Without legal marriage, Emily's position was precarious, and she could be forced to leave if the local authorities decided their arrangement was improper. Emily's hands shook as she read the official language, seeing in it the power to destroy everything they had built together, while Daniel's jaw tightened with the controlled anger of a man who had learned to hate bureaucratic interference in personal matters. The threat was external but very real, challenging not just their practical arrangements but the emotional bonds that had grown between them over the months of shared struggle and quiet contentment. The crucial revelation came during a long conversation on the porch one evening, when Daniel finally shared the full story of his wife, Margaret's death, and the devastating loneliness that had nearly destroyed him before Emily's arrival. His words painted a picture of a man who had given up on the possibility of happiness, who had been slowly dying inside until the arrival of 3 desperate strangers had awakened something in him he thought was lost forever. Emily, moved by his vulnerability, shared her own story of loss and the terror of trying to keep her children safe while the world seemed determined to defeat her at every turn. The mutual revelation of their deepest fears and strongest hopes created a bond between them that transcended their practical arrangement, transforming their relationship into something neither had expected but both desperately needed. Tom, the oldest of the ranch hands, became an unexpected ally when he approached Daniel with information about the source of the complaint to the county authorities. A neighboring rancher, jealous of Thunder Ridge Ranch's prosperity and disapproving of Daniel's unconventional household, had been spreading rumors about improper behavior and questioning Emily's moral character. The old cowboy's weathered face was grim as he delivered this news, his loyalty to Daniel evident in his willingness to confront the gossip that threatened to destroy the family they had all come to value. Daniel's anger was carefully controlled, but unmistakable, the protective instincts that had been dormant for years fully awakened by this threat to those under his care. Emily, learning of this development, felt her fragile sense of security crumble as she realized that their happiness had made them targets for those who couldn't understand or accept their choices. The children, sensing the tension between the adults despite efforts to shield them, began showing signs of the anxiety that had marked their early days at the ranch. Matthew became withdrawn and clingy, afraid that they would have to leave the only real home he could remember, while Sarah started having nightmares that left her crying for both her deceased father and Daniel, the 2 men who had represented safety in her young life. Emily's heart broke watching her children's fear, remembering too well the months of uncertainty that had marked their journey to Thunder Ridge Ranch. Daniel, observing their distress, felt his resolve harden into something approaching steel, understanding that his commitment to this makeshift family would be tested in ways he had never anticipated. The decision to fight the rumors and legal challenges rather than simply submitting to pressure was made jointly. Emily and Daniel sitting in the ranch house kitchen as the children slept upstairs, their voices low but their determination clear. They discussed the practical aspects of their situation with the directness of partners facing a common threat, examining their options and the potential consequences of each choice. Emily's suggestion that she might simply leave to protect Daniel's reputation was firmly rejected, his response making clear that he viewed her as essential to his life and his children's well-being. The conversation marked a turning point in their relationship, moving them from careful coexistence to active partnership in facing whatever challenges lay ahead. The arrival of Judge Harrison from the county seat brought both opportunity and crisis, as the stern-faced official came to investigate the complaints about Thunder Ridge Ranch's unconventional household arrangements. Daniel met him with quiet dignity, inviting him to see for himself how the ranch operated and how the children were being cared for, while Emily prepared a meal that showcased her domestic skills and her integral role in the ranch's daily life. The judge's initial skepticism was evident, but as he observed the obvious affection between Daniel and the children, the respectful way Emily was treated by the ranch hands, and the general atmosphere of purposeful contentment that pervaded the household, his expression began to soften. This important ally would prove crucial in the battles to come, his official endorsement carrying weight that could protect them from future interference. The major crisis arrived when Emily's brother-in-law appeared at Thunder Ridge Ranch, claiming legal guardianship of her children and demanding their immediate return to his custody back east. His arrival was a shock that threatened to destroy everything they had built, his legal papers appearing valid and his claims about providing a proper home for the children carrying the weight of social convention. Emily's terror was visceral as she realized that the law might side with blood relations over the bonds of love and commitment that had been forged at Thunder Ridge Ranch. Daniel's protective instincts flared to life as he saw the fear in Emily's eyes and witnessed the children's obvious distress at the prospect of leaving the only stable home they had known since their father's death. The confrontation that followed would test every relationship and every assumption about what constituted a real family. The legal battle that ensued revealed the complexity of their situation, as Emily's brother-in-law argued that unmarried arrangements were improper and that the children needed the stability of traditional family structures. His presentation to Judge Harrison emphasized moral concerns and social propriety, painting Emily as a fallen woman and Daniel as a man taking advantage of her desperation. Emily's defense of their life at Thunder Ridge Ranch was passionate but hampered by the unconventional nature of their arrangement. Her love for Daniel clear to anyone who observed them together but legally irrelevant to the question of custody. The children's obvious preference for staying with Daniel and their distress at the prospect of leaving carried emotional weight but uncertain legal significance. Daniel's testimony before Judge Harrison was a turning point that revealed the depth of his commitment to Emily and her children. His careful words, painting a picture of a family bound by choice rather than blood, but no less valid for that difference. He spoke of Matthew's development from a frightened boy into a confident young man, learning the responsibilities of ranch life, of Sarah's transformation from a withdrawn child into a bright, happy little girl who filled their home with laughter. His description of Emily's role went far beyond that of housekeeper, encompassing her contributions to the ranch's success, her skills as a mother, and her essential place in their shared life. The emotional weight of his testimony was evident to everyone present, including Emily's brother-in-law, who began to realize that his legal claim might be trumped by the obvious bonds of affection and mutual dependence. The transformative crisis reached its peak when Sarah, overwhelmed by the adult conflicts swirling around her, suffered a severe asthma attack that required immediate medical attention. Emily's expertise in caring for her daughter, developed through previous episodes, proved crucial in stabilizing the child's condition while Daniel rode hard to fetch the doctor. The brother-in-law, witnessing Emily's competent response to the medical emergency and the obvious trust between all members of the household during the crisis, began to question his assumptions about their fitness as caregivers. When Sarah, recovering from her attack, clung to both Emily and Daniel while expressing terror at the prospect of leaving them, even Judge Harrison was moved by the obvious strength of their emotional bonds. The crisis had stripped away pretense and revealed the true nature of the family they had created together, transforming everyone's understanding of what they were fighting to preserve. The final confrontation came when Judge Harrison delivered his decision in the ranch house parlor. All parties gathered to hear the ruling that would determine the future of the family that had formed at Thunder Ridge Ranch. His words were measured and careful, acknowledging the legal complexity of the situation while emphasizing the paramount importance of the children's welfare and best interests. The judge's observations about the obvious love and stability in the household, contrasted with the disruption that would result from removing the children from their chosen family, carried more weight than legal precedent. Emily held her breath as the decision was announced, her hand finding Daniel's in a gesture that spoke of their unity in facing whatever judgment was rendered. Judge Harrison's ruling favored keeping the family together, but with the condition that Daniel and Emily formalized their relationship through marriage within a reasonable time frame to address the social and legal concerns that had precipitated the crisis. The decision was a victory that felt like vindication of everything they had built together, while the requirement for marriage forced them to confront feelings they had been carefully avoiding. Emily's relief at keeping her children was mixed with anxiety about the implications of legal marriage, while Daniel's satisfaction with the judge's wisdom was tempered by concern about Emily's feelings regarding the imposed timeline. The brother-in-law's grudging acceptance of the decision marked the end of the immediate threat but left them all understanding that their happiness had been hard-won and remained precious. The proposal, when it finally came, was quintessentially Daniel, practical and straightforward but delivered with an emotion that transformed the simple words into something approaching poetry. He found Emily in the garden she had created behind the ranch house, her hands dirty from tending the vegetables that would feed them through the coming winter, and spoke of his need for her that went far beyond legal requirements or social expectations. His admission that he had come to love not just her and her children but the life they had created together was met with tears that spoke of relief, joy, and the overwhelming gratitude of a woman who had found safety after a long journey through darkness. Their embrace, among the growing things she had planted, was witnessed only by her children, who had been quietly watching from the kitchen window with bright smiles. The wedding itself was a simple affair, held in the ranch house parlor, with Tom serving as best man and Sarah scattering wildflowers from Emily's garden as an impromptu flower girl. Judge Harrison performed the ceremony with evident satisfaction, clearly pleased with the resolution he had helped to orchestrate, while the ranch hands gathered outside the windows to witness the formalization of bonds they had all recognized. Long before the law required acknowledgement, Matthew stood straight and proud as he watched his mother become Mrs. Daniel Cross, understanding instinctively that this ceremony represented security and permanence in a way that their previous arrangements had not. The simple words of the marriage ceremony carried weight beyond their literal meaning, transforming their chosen family into a legal entity that could weather future storms. The climax of their journey came not with grand gestures but with the quiet moment after the ceremony when Daniel officially adopted Matthew and Sarah, giving them his name and his legal protection in a way that completed their transformation from desperate strangers into the Cross family of Thunder Ridge Ranch. Emily's tears as she watched her children receive the security she had fought so hard to provide them spoke of a mother's deepest gratitude and love. The children's joy was uncomplicated and complete, their acceptance of Daniel as their new father as natural as their earlier acceptance of the ranch as their home. The legal documents that Judge Harrison signed that day represented more than paperwork. They were the foundation of a family that had been built on love, tested by adversity, and ultimately proven stronger than blood ties or social convention. The weeks following the wedding brought a settling into their new reality that felt both natural and revolutionary, as Emily adjusted to being truly mistress of Thunder Ridge Ranch rather than merely its housekeeper. Daniel's treatment of her changed subtly but significantly, his deference to her opinions and his obvious pride in her accomplishments, marking her elevated status in ways that were apparent to everyone around them. The children thrived under the security of their new legal status, Matthew throwing himself into learning ranch work with renewed enthusiasm, while Sarah began showing artistic talents that Emily encouraged by providing her with better materials and opportunities for expression. The ranch itself seemed to prosper under their combined stewardship, as if the land responded to the contentment of those who worked it. The first real test of their marriage came with the challenges of the following winter. Harsh weather that tested both their practical preparations and their emotional bonds as a newly formalized family. Emily's skills as a manager and mother were crucial in maintaining morale during the long months of isolation, while Daniel's steady strength provided the foundation that allowed them all to weather the storms with confidence. The children adapted to their new reality with the resilience of youth, Matthew helping with winter chores that made him feel essential to the ranch's survival, while Sarah spent long evenings by the fire creating artwork that decorated their walls and warmed their hearts. The intimacy of their small family unit during those cold months deepened their bonds in ways that the easier seasons could not have achieved. Spring arrived at Thunder Ridge Ranch with the promise of new growth and renewed hope, marking the first anniversary of Emily and her children's arrival and the completion of their transformation from desperate refugees into the established Cross family. The changes in all of them were remarkably had evolved from a frightened widow into a confident ranch wife. Her children had grown strong and secure under Daniel's guidance, and Daniel himself had been transformed from a lonely widower into the patriarch of a thriving family. Their new equilibrium was built on mutual respect, genuine affection, and the shared understanding that they had created something precious together. The ranch prospered under their joint stewardship, becoming not just a successful business, but a true home that welcomed others who needed refuge from life's storms. Looking back on their journey from desperate strangers to chosen family, Emily often marveled at the series of small miracles that had brought them together and sustained them through every challenge. The decision to knock on Daniel's door that first dusty day had required courage she didn't know she possessed, while his choice to welcome them had revealed a capacity for love he thought had died with his first wife. Their children, once uncertain and fearful, had blossomed into confident young people who understood that family was defined not by blood but by commitment and care. The reflection on their shared history revealed patterns of grace and providence that seemed to guide them toward each other and toward the life they had built together at Thunder Ridge Ranch. The main theme that emerged from their story was the transformative power of offering shelter to those in need, demonstrating how acts of simple kindness could ripple outward to heal broken hearts and create new possibilities for happiness. Daniel's willingness to open his doors to strangers had not only saved Emily and her children, but had ultimately saved him from the slow death of isolation and grief. Emily's courage in accepting his offer and working to prove her worth had created space for love to grow in a place that had been marked by loss and loneliness. Their children had learned that security came not from circumstances, but from the commitment of adults who chose to love and protect them, regardless of legal or blood relationships. The future stretched before the Cross family, like the vast Wyoming sky full of possibilities, and blessed with the foundation of love and mutual commitment that would sustain them through whatever challenges lay ahead. Emily's final thoughts, as she stood in the garden she had planted, watching her children play while Daniel worked nearby, were of gratitude for the journey that had brought them to this place of peace and belonging. The ranch that had once been simply Daniel's property had become their shared inheritance, a legacy they would pass to their children and perhaps to other desperate souls who might one day appear at their gate, seeking shelter from life's storms. Their story would continue to unfold in the daily rhythms of ranch life, but its essential message was complete. Sometimes the greatest gifts come from the simple act of opening one's heart and home to those who need shelter, and healing broken hearts requires nothing more than the courage to love again.